This is HOA craze. I did not raise my voice, I raised my evidence packet. I teach computer science part-time at a community college in Montreal, Quebec, and I cannot afford complaints that might reach my department head. That fact was running through my mind when Nancy Harris appeared in my driveway at 4 in the afternoon, waving a clipboard and screaming about my illegal fence construction. I am standing there with a post-hole digger leaning against my porch, having moved it there exactly 5 minutes earlier while I grabbed water, and she is already writing me up for code violations. The fence does not exist yet. I have not dug a single hole. Nancy Harris is the board secretary for Summit Ridge HOA Incorporated, and she has been on my case since the day I submitted my fence application 3 weeks ago. She is holding up a tiny line level like it is courtroom evidence, and she is telling me the project is already non-compliant because my contractor left tools visible from the street. I do not have a contractor yet. That post-hole digger is mine, and I moved it to my porch for 30 seconds while I went inside. You do not get an opinion, you get a fine schedule, she says, and she taps the clipboard with one finger. This is your second warning. Next time it is collections. I have never received a first warning. I check my phone for emails, check my mailbox mentally, and I realize she is just making this up as she goes. Summit Ridge is one of those developments where the HOA committee micromanages fence styles like it is fine art, and Nancy has decided my project is her personal crusade before I even break ground. I take a breath and pull out my small notepad, the pages already damp from the heat and my sweaty hands. I ask her which section of the covenants covers tool storage on private property. She does not answer. Instead, she walks over to the property line, pulls out a flashlight even though it is broad daylight, and starts shining it along the grass where my fence will eventually go. Your setback is wrong, she says. You are encroaching on the easement. I have the survey. The fence line is marked. Everything is 4 inches inside my property line, exactly where the HOA architectural committee told me to place it. I tell her this, and she waves the flashlight at me like I am lying. Nancy flips through her clipboard papers, and I can see she has printed out my application with red pen marks all over it. Every dimension I submitted has a correction note. Every material choice has a question mark. She tells me the application was never fully approved, which is news to me because I have an email from the architectural committee with the word approved in the subject line. I pull up my phone to show her. She does not look. That is provisional, she says. The board can revoke it any time. My neighbor 2 houses down is standing in his yard watering the lawn, and he pauses mid-spray to stare at us. I can feel the whole street watching this play out, and I know Nancy is doing this on purpose. She wants everyone to see her enforcing the rules, so no one else tries to build anything without her permission. Nancy turns back to me and says the real problem is my contractor vehicles. If any truck or trailer parks on the street during construction, it will be cited and towed immediately. I point out that I have not hired anyone yet, and she smiles in a way that makes my stomach drop. I can put you on the agenda and keep you there, she says, and I realize this is not about the fence. This is about control. Nancy Harris has found someone she thinks she can bully, and she is going to make an example out of me in front of the entire neighborhood. She hands me a violation notice, and I see it is dated today with a fine amount already filled in. $50 for unauthorized construction staging. I have staged nothing. The post-hole digger has been on my porch for 5 minutes. I ask her how I am supposed to build the fence if she is going to fine me before I start. She taps the line level against her palm and tells me that is my problem, not hers. Then she walks back to her car, gets in and drives away, leaving me standing there with a violation notice for a project that does not exist yet. I go inside and read the notice 3 times. The violation code does not match anything in the covenants. The fine amount is not listed in the fee schedule. I pull out my copy of the HOA documents and I start cross-referencing every line. Nothing matches. It is like she made up the rule on the spot. That night I call my buddy Marcus, who works as a property manager for a company that handles about 15 HOAs in the area. He knows procedure, he knows records requests, and he has seen every dirty trick in the book. I tell him what happened, and he goes quiet for a second. She fined you before you started building? He asks. Yes. And she said your approval was provisional even though you have it in writing? Yes. Marcus tells me to file a formal records request immediately, ask for all enforcement actions taken in the neighborhood for the last 2 years, ask for the meeting minutes where my fence was discussed, and ask for documentation of the fine structure Nancy cited. He says if the HOA is selectively enforcing rules or making up fees, the records will prove it. He also tells me to photograph everything, save every email, and do not pay the fine until I see proof it is legitimate. I spend the next hour drafting the records request, and I submit it through the HOA portal with a read receipt. I also email the board president and the management company, asking for clarification on the fine and the approval status. I keep everything polite and factual, because I know Nancy is looking for any excuse to escalate. The next morning I wake up to an email from Nancy. She has CC'd the entire board and the management company. The email says my records request is excessive and harassing, and she is formally notifying me that any further complaints will result in additional fines for disrupting HOA operations. I read it twice and feel my blood pressure spike. She is trying to intimidate me out of asking questions. I forward the email to Marcus, and he calls me immediately. She just threatened you for filing a records request, he says. That is retaliation, and in most places that is a violation of state HOA law. You need to document this, and you need to push back hard. I tell him about my job situation, about how I cannot afford to be dragged into meetings and hearings every week because I am on probation at the college, and missing work is not an option. Marcus tells me that is exactly why Nancy picked me. She thinks I will fold because I have too much to lose. Do not fold, he says. Fight her on paper. Make her produce the records. If she cannot, you have her. I decide to start building the fence anyway. If Nancy wants to find me, she is going to have to cite something real, and I am going to document every single step so she cannot claim I violated anything. I call a contractor I found online, a guy named Ray, who has good reviews and has worked in Summit Ridge before. He agrees to come out that afternoon to give me a quote. Ray shows up in a white pickup truck with his company logo on the side, and we walk the property line together. He pulls out a tape measure and checks my survey markers, and he tells me everything looks clean. The setback is correct, the height is within code, and the style I picked is on the HOA approved list. He says he can start in 3 days. I am about to shake his hand when Nancy's car pulls up to the curb. She gets out, walks straight over, and starts interrogating Ray. She asks for his business license, his insurance, his contractor registration. Ray handles it calmly, pulling out his phone and showing her his credentials. Nancy takes photos of everything, including his truck, his license plate, and his face. You should know this property is under compliance review, she tells Ray. Any work you do here might be subject to removal, and you will not be compensated. Ray looks at me, and I can see he is weighing whether this job is worth the hassle. I tell him I have written approval from the architectural committee, and I will send him a copy tonight. He nods slowly, but I can tell Nancy has rattled him. After Ray leaves, Nancy walks over to where the survey stakes are, and crouches down. She pulls out her phone and takes a photo, then she stands up and tells me the stakes have been moved. I ask her how she knows, and she says she has photos from last week proving it. I have been checking those stakes every day since I got the survey done, and no one has touched them, but now she is claiming someone is tampering with the boundary line, and she is implying it is me. I go inside and check my doorbell camera footage. I scrub through the last week, looking for anyone near the property line. Nothing. No one has touched the stakes. I download the footage, timestamp it, and save it to 3 different places. If Nancy is going to claim tampering, I am going to prove she is lying. That night I get another email from her. This one says my contractor vehicles are not permitted to park on the street during construction, and any violation will result in immediate towing. She has attached a copy of a street parking rule that I have never seen before, and when I check the HOA covenants, the rule does not exist. I reply asking for the section number where this rule appears. She does not respond. 2 days later, Ray calls me and says he cannot take the job. He is apologetic, but he tells me Nancy contacted his company and threatened to file a complaint with the licensing board if he worked on my property. He says it is not worth the risk. I thank him for being honest, and I hang up feeling like I just got punched in the stomach. Nancy is not just targeting me, she is targeting anyone who tries to help me. This is beyond petty, this is coordinated harassment, and I have no idea how to fight someone who controls the paperwork and the process. I call Marcus again, and I tell him what Nancy did to my contractor. He is quiet for a long time, and then he says this has crossed into actionable territory. If Nancy is interfering with my ability to use my property by threatening vendors, that is tortious interference, and I could have grounds for a lawsuit, but lawsuits take time and money, and I do not have either. Marcus tells me to focus on the records request. If the HOA does not respond within the legal time frame, that is a separate violation I can report to the state. He also tells me to start showing up to the board meetings and putting everything on the record. Make Nancy explain herself in public. Make the board own her behavior. The next board meeting is in 5 days, and I mark it on my calendar. I am going to walk in with a tabbed binder, and I am going to ask Nancy to produce the documentation for every single fine and rule she has cited. If she cannot, I am going to demand the fines be reversed and the approval be honored. In the meantime, I hire a different contractor, a smaller outfit run by a guy named Tony, who does not care about HOA drama because he works in 5 different neighborhoods and Nancy has no leverage over him. Tony agrees to start in 2 days, and he tells me to let him know if anyone tries to interfere. He has dealt with board members like Nancy before, and he is not intimidated. The morning Tony is supposed to start, I get a text from my younger brother. He is driving up from Burlington to visit for the weekend, and he is planning to stay at my place. I tell him that is fine, and I give him the gate code for the neighborhood. He is supposed to arrive around 6 in the evening. At 5:30, I get a call from my brother. He is parked on my street, and there is a tow truck hooked up to his car. I run outside, and I see Nancy standing next to the tow truck driver, pointing at my brother's vehicle. She is telling the driver the car is illegally parked and needs to be removed immediately. I sprint down the driveway and tell the driver to stop. He looks at me, then at Nancy, and he asks who called for the tow. Nancy says she did, under her authority as board secretary. I tell the driver my brother is a guest and the car is legally parked on a public street. The driver looks confused. "Ma'am, is this your property?" he asks Nancy. Nancy says the HOA has the authority to enforce parking rules, and she shows him a copy of the same fake rule she sent me earlier. The driver reads it, and I can see he is not buying it. He asks her if she has a signed tow authorization from the property owner or a valid citation. She does not. I pull out my phone and show the driver my doorbell camera footage, proving my brother just arrived and has been parked for less than 10 minutes. I also show him the HOA covenants, where there is no mention of the parking rule Nancy is citing. The driver looks at Nancy, shakes his head, and tells her he is not towing the car without proper documentation. Nancy's face goes red. She starts yelling at the driver, telling him he is going to lose his contract with the HOA if he does not follow through. The driver unhooks the chains, gets back in his truck, and drives away. Nancy turns to me and I can see she is barely holding it together. "You are going to regret this," she says. "I am putting you on the agenda for the next meeting, and I am going to make sure everyone knows you are a problem resident." I stare at the violation letter she handed me earlier, the one with the imaginary fine and the fake rule, and I smile, because it just proved exactly what I suspected. Nancy has been making this up as she goes, and now I have her on camera trying to tow my brother's car using a rule that does not exist. That footage is going on the record at the next meeting, and she is not going to be able to talk her way out of it. My brother parks his car in my driveway, and we go inside. He asks me what the hell just happened, and I give him the short version. HOA board secretary, with a grudge, fake rules, harassment campaign. He tells me I need to lawyer up, but I explain that I am trying to handle this without spending thousands on attorneys. He does not look convinced. The next morning, Tony and his crew show up to start the fence. I meet them outside, and I warn them that Nancy might try to interfere. Tony nods and tells his guys to ignore anyone who is not me or a cop. They start unloading materials, and within 20 minutes, Nancy is back. She parks her car across the street and just watches. She is holding her phone up, recording everything. Tony sees her and shrugs. He tells me he has dealt with worse, and he keeps working. Nancy stays for an hour, filming the entire time, and then she gets in her car and leaves. That afternoon, I get an email from the HOA management company. It says my fence project has been flagged for a compliance review, and all work must stop immediately until the review is complete. The email is copied to Nancy, the board president, and the architectural committee. I call the management company and ask what triggered the review. The woman on the phone tells me Nancy submitted a complaint alleging unpermitted work and boundary violations. I tell her I have written approval and a valid survey, and I offer to send copies. She says she will forward my documents to the committee, but the stop work order stands until the review is complete. I ask how long that will take. She does not know. I hang up and immediately call Tony to tell him he has to stop. He is not happy, but he understands. He packs up his tools, and I am back to square one. Marcus calls me that night and tells me the stop work order is another pressure tactic. Nancy knows the review process can take weeks, and she is hoping I will give up or run out of time. He tells me to file a complaint with the board, demand an expedited review, and show up at the meeting ready to fight. I spend the next 3 days preparing. I print out every email, every notice, every rule Nancy has cited. I cross-reference everything with the covenants and the state HOA statutes. I organize it all in a tabbed binder with section dividers and highlighted passages. I also compile the doorbell footage, the tow truck incident, and the contractor interference into a single video file that I can play from my phone. The night before the meeting, I barely sleep. I keep running through what I am going to say, how I am going to present the evidence, how Nancy is going to react. I know she is going to try to shut me down or redirect the conversation, but I am not going to let her. This is my one chance to put everything on the record in front of the entire board and the neighborhood. The meeting is at 7 in the evening at the community clubhouse. I arrive at 6:45 with my binder, my phone, and a printed copy of the agenda. The room is already filling up with residents, and I can see Nancy at the front table with the other board members. She is talking to the president, a man named Ed, who looks like he would rather be anywhere else. I take a seat in the second row, right in the middle where everyone can see me. Marcus told me to sit up front and make eye contact. Do not hide in the back. I set my binder on my lap and wait. The meeting starts with routine business, budget reports, landscaping updates, pool maintenance. I am barely listening because I am going over my notes in my head. Then Ed gets to new business, and he calls my name. He says there is a compliance matter related to my fence project, and Nancy is going to present the details. Nancy stands up, walks to the front, and pulls out a folder. She starts reading from a prepared statement, describing my project as non-compliant and unauthorized. She says I failed to follow proper procedures, ignored architectural guidelines, and refused to cooperate with the board. She makes it sound like I am the problem, like I have been defiant and disrespectful from the start. I let her finish. Then I raise my hand and ask if I can respond. Ed nods, and I stand up with my binder. I start by thanking the board for their time, and then I pull out the approval email from the architectural committee. I read the subject line out loud. Fence application approved. I pass copies to the board members, and I watch Nancy's face tighten. This is the written approval I received 3 weeks ago, I say. It includes the approved height, materials, and setback. Everything in my project matches this approval exactly. Nancy interrupts and says the approval was provisional. I ask her to show me where it says that. She does not have an answer. I move on to the violation notices. I pull out the first one, the $50 fine for unauthorized construction staging. I read the violation code out loud, and then I open the covenants to the fee schedule. The code does not exist. I pass copies to the board. This fine is based on a rule that is not in our governing documents, I say. I have asked Nancy multiple times to show me where this rule appears, and she has not responded. If you want to see how this meeting ends, and whether Nancy finally gets held accountable, make sure you like this video and subscribe, because the payoff is coming, and it is worth it. I pull out the next violation, the street parking rule. Nancy used to try to tow my brother's car. I read it out loud, and then I showed the board the covenant section on parking. The rule Nancy cited does not exist there either. I also pull up the doorbell footage on my phone and offer to play it for the board. Ed says that will not be necessary, but I can see he is taking notes. Nancy is shifting in her chair, and she keeps looking at Ed like she is expecting him to shut me down. He does not. I move on to the contractor interference. I describe how Nancy contacted my first contractor and threatened him, forcing him to drop the job. I explain how she showed up during my second contractor's first day and recorded the crew for an hour, and how she filed a complaint that resulted in a stop work order, even though I have written approval. This is not about compliance, I say. This is about control. Nancy Harris has used her position to harass me, threaten my vendors, and invent rules that do not exist, and I have documentation for all of it. I hold up the binder, and I offer to submit it as a formal exhibit. Ed accepts it, and I hand it over. Nancy stands up and starts to argue, but Ed cuts her off. Nancy, did you issue these fines? He asks. Yes, but... And are these rules in the covenants? Nancy hesitates. She says the rules are based on board interpretations and past precedent. Ed asks her to provide documentation of those interpretations. She does not have any. Ed looks at the other board members, and I can see them exchanging glances. One of them, a woman named Linda, asks Nancy if she has records of other residents being fined under the same rules. Nancy says she does, but she does not have them with her. Linda asks her to provide those records at the next meeting. I am not done. I pull out my phone again and show Ed the survey stakes Nancy claimed were moved. I play the doorbell footage showing no one touched the stakes for a week. I also pull out a printed email from the county GIS office showing the exact coordinates of my property line and the survey pins. I point out that the pin Nancy cited in her complaint is for the wrong parcel. It is 20 feet south of my property, on my neighbor's land. Nancy claimed I was encroaching on an easement, I say, but the pin she used as evidence does not even belong to my lot. The county GIS proves it. Nancy's face goes white. She starts to say something, but Ed holds up a hand and tells her to sit down. He looks at me and asks if I have any other concerns. I tell him yes. I filed a formal records request 2 weeks ago, and I have not received a response. Under state law, the HOA has 14 days to respond, and that deadline has passed. Ed looks at Nancy and asks if she processed the request. Nancy says she did not think it was valid because it was too broad. I pull out a copy of the state statute and show Ed the section on records requests. It says, requests must be responded to within 14 days unless the board formally votes to deny them. Nancy did not bring it to a vote, she just ignored it. Ed closes his folder and tells Nancy they need to have a conversation after the meeting. He thanks me for my presentation, and he says the board will review everything and provide a response within the week. He also lifts the stop work order effective immediately, pending the review. I thank him, and sit down. The meeting continues with other business, but I am not paying attention anymore. I can feel the whole room watching Nancy, and I can see her staring at the table, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. When the meeting ends, several neighbors come up to me and thank me for speaking up. One of them tells me Nancy tried the same thing with his shed last year, and he ended up paying the fine because he did not know how to fight it. Marcus meets me outside and claps me on the shoulder. You just put her on the record, he says. Now the board has to act. The next morning I get an email from Ed. He apologizes for the confusion and confirms that my fence approval is valid and the stop work order is lifted. He also says the board is conducting an internal review of Nancy's enforcement actions and they will be in touch. I forward the email to Tony and he tells me he can restart work the next day. But I am not satisfied yet. I still have not seen the records I requested, and I still do not know how many other residents Nancy has targeted with fake fines. I send a follow-up email to Ed, asking for the records again and requesting a formal audit of all fines issued in the last 2 years. I copy the management company and the entire board. 2 days later I get a call from the management company. The woman on the phone tells me they are hiring an independent auditor to review the HOA financials and enforcement records. She says it was prompted by my complaint and several other residents who came forward after the meeting. She also tells me the board has placed Nancy on administrative leave pending the review. Tony and his crew finish the fence in 3 days. It looks great. The posts are level, the panels are aligned, and the gate swings smooth. I walk the property line with my tape measure, checking every dimension against the approved plans. Everything is perfect. The following week I get a thick envelope in the mail from the management company. Inside is a copy of the audit report. I sit down at my kitchen table and start reading. The audit found that Nancy had been issuing fines using codes that did not exist in the covenants. She had created her own enforcement fee schedule and had been collecting money without board approval. The report lists dozens of violations going back 3 years, all tied to Nancy's pet projects and personal grievances. My fence fine is on the list, along with fines for holiday decorations, lawn ornaments, paint colors, and contractor parking. The total amount collected is over $18,000. The report also finds that Nancy failed to process multiple records requests, ignored appeals, and retaliated against residents who questioned her authority. It recommends that the board refund all improper fines, revise the enforcement procedures, and consider removing Nancy from her position. I get a separate email from Ed later that day. He says the board voted unanimously to accept the audit recommendations. All fines based on non-existent rules will be refunded. The board is also changing the hearing procedures to require documentation and board approval before any fine is issued. No single board member will have unilateral enforcement authority anymore. And Nancy? Ed says the board issued her a formal written warning for harassment and abuse of authority. If she engages in similar behavior again, she will be removed from the board. I forward the email to Marcus, and he calls me immediately. This is a win, he says. You just changed the rules for the entire neighborhood. A few days later, I am sitting on my back patio, looking at my new fence, when my neighbor from 2 houses down walks over. He is the one who was watering his lawn the day Nancy showed up screaming. He tells me he got a refund check in the mail for a fine Nancy issued him last year over a trash can placement. He did not even know the fine was improper until the audit came out. Thank you for fighting that, he says. A lot of us were too scared to push back. I tell him I almost gave up a dozen times, and I only kept going because I was too stubborn to let her win. He laughs and says stubbornness is underrated. 2 weeks later, there is another board meeting. This time I do not have to present anything, I am just there to watch. The meeting agenda includes a vote on new enforcement procedures and a discussion of the audit findings. Nancy is sitting at the board table, but she is not leading the discussion. Ed is. Ed starts by summarizing the audit and the refund process. He says over 40 residents are receiving refunds totaling more than $18,000. He also announces the new enforcement procedures. All fines must be approved by a majority vote of the board. All rules must be cited with specific covenant sections. Residents have the right to appeal any fine before it is sent to collections, and all records requests must be processed within 14 days or brought to a vote. Then Ed reads a statement that Nancy has been formally reprimanded for abuse of authority. The statement describes her pattern of selective enforcement, retaliation, and procedural violations. It also says that Nancy will no longer have unilateral authority to issue fines or handle records requests. Those responsibilities will be shared by the entire board. Nancy does not say anything. She just sits there, staring at the table. A few residents in the audience start clapping, and I can see her face turn red. After the meeting, I walk out to the parking lot, and I see Marcus waiting by his car. He asks me how it feels, and I tell him it feels like justice, even if it took too long to get here. The next morning, I get a call from a reporter at the local paper. She says she heard about the HOA audit and the refunds, and she wants to write a story. I give her a brief interview, keeping it factual and focused on the procedural changes. The story runs 2 days later, with the headline HOA, refunds thousands after audit fines improper fines. Nancy's name is not mentioned, but everyone in the neighborhood knows who the story is about. A week later, I am in my front yard, trimming the hedge near the new fence, when a car pulls up. It is Nancy. She gets out and walks over, and I brace myself for another confrontation, but she does not yell. She just stands there, looking at the fence. "You got what you wanted," she says. I tell her I did not want this. I just wanted to build a fence without being harassed. She does not respond. She gets back in her car and drives away, and I never see her at another HOA meeting again. The following month, the board holds an election for Nancy's position. She does not run. A new secretary is elected, a retired accountant who promises transparency and fair enforcement. The first thing he does is publish the enforcement records online so everyone can see what fines have been issued and why. Marcus texts me a few weeks later and tells me the Summit Ridge story is making the rounds in property management circles. Other HOAs are using it as a case study for what not to do. He says I should be proud, and I tell him I am just glad it is over. My fence is still standing. The posts are solid, the gate works, and the whole thing looks exactly like the architectural committee approved it. Every time I look at it, I think about Nancy showing up that first day with her clipboard and her fake rules, and I think about how close I came to giving up. I also think about the other residents who got their money back, the ones who were too intimidated to fight. That is the real win, not my fence, not the reprimand, the fact that no one else has to deal with Nancy's shakedown tactics anymore. I am sitting on my porch a few months later when my brother calls. He is planning another visit, and he asks if it is safe to park on the street this time. I laugh and tell him yes, the tow truck is not coming back. He says he is bringing his girlfriend, and they want to see the fence that caused all the trouble. When they arrive, my brother walks around the property line, inspecting every post and panel. He tells me it looks good, and then he asks if it was worth it. I tell him yes. Not because of the fence, but because I proved that you can fight back against people like Nancy if you are willing to document everything and stay calm. His girlfriend asks what happened to Nancy, and I tell her she is still on the board, but she does not have any real power anymore. The new procedures make it impossible for one person to bully the neighborhood. She says that is a happy ending, and I agree. That night, we are sitting around the fire pit in my backyard when I get an email notification. It is from the management company. The subject line says Final Audit Report. I open it and skim through. The report confirms that all improper fines have been refunded, all enforcement procedures have been updated, and the HOA is now in compliance with state law. The final paragraph thanks me for bringing the issues to the board's attention and says the neighborhood is better off because of it. I close my laptop and look at my brother. He is roasting a marshmallow and laughing at something his girlfriend said. My fence is behind us, solid and straight. The HOA is no longer a threat. And Nancy Harris is just another cautionary tale about what happens when someone mistakes a volunteer position for a dictatorship. I stared at the violation letter and smiled, because it proved exactly what I suspected. Nancy's favorite fee was imaginary, and the public meeting minutes turned against her when I submitted a certified statement from a former board member describing her pattern and motive. The HOA changed the hearing rules so residents cannot be railroaded anymore, and Nancy got a written warning for harassment behavior that will follow her for the rest of her time on the board. It is over. I won. And every time I see that fence, I remember that sometimes the only way to stop a bully is to stand up, document everything, and refuse to back down. Thanks for watching, and I appreciate you being here.